we have two kinds of productivity that we can think of. Really, they're the same, but in the two different types we have to consider slightly different variables that determine the productivity. So in one kind we look at how much is produced by a primary producer. So this is primary productivity. How much is produced is going to depend on perhaps the amount of sunlight available, water, nutrients, and other limiting factors. And the output, the productivity, might be in seeds, it might be in the amount of biomass, the amount of leaves. So this is net primary productivity. The reason we're talking about net primary productivity is because this amount of matter in this plant is the result of the amount of carbon dioxide that has been fixed by photosynthesis minus the amount that has been lost to respiration. Only the amount that got fixed, that was used in photosynthesis, could have been made into leaves, because the rest of it had to be used up in respiration to get energy out of the food itself. So we are just left with this net amount. But how much did we have in the beginning before the plant respired? So gross primary productivity is the amount of carbon dioxide fixed without considering losses to respiration. Net primary productivity equals gross primary productivity minus R. Now, in the other type of productivity, we talk about secondary productivity. And the reason we're talking about secondary productivity is that now we're talking about consumers, so perhaps like a caterpillar, and in this case we're thinking about how big the animal is getting, how much growth it's got. If I'm a farmer, I might be very concerned with how big my chickens are getting, for example. Okay, so here's a happy caterpillar. In this case then, the net primary productivity is the gross secondary productivity minus the respiration. It's exactly the same as for the primary. So gross net secondary productivity equals gross secondary productivity minus R. So what is this gross secondary productivity? Well, it is the amount of food that actually enters into the intestines. So that gets broken down, enters the intestines, and is absorbed by the gut. Of course, some of it doesn't go into the intestines, but is instead passed out as a pile of poo. So we need to subtract that. Over in the plant doesn't produce any poo, so we don't need to consider it. So gross secondary productivity equals the amount of food eaten minus the feces, because the feces was not absorbed by the body, and net secondary productivity is that GSP amount minus R.